Hello my darlings and welcome to Jessie James Bead's first workshop of the year with myself Jem Hawkes here with a plethora of Jessie James Bead's goodies and the Out of This World wrapping class. Let's head down to the board and unpack the beautiful parcel that is the Out of This World kit. Here we go. So I've hidden the project because I want that to be a little bit of a surprise for a second. And I'm going to unbag, not quite as good sounding as unbox, but let's take out of the bag what you get in your kit. So for me, I work with wire to create jewellery, and we've got 2 gauges of wire. We're working primarily with the slightly heavier one today, which is a medium temper 18 gauge wire, and you get a perfectly adequate length of wire in your project. Janet says, is this live? It is indeed. Hello Janet, how are you? I hope you're having a good day, darling. You've also got a slightly lighter gauge of wire, which you can add on some bits and bobs a little bit later on if you fancy. So I'm going to put those up at the top for now, and we'll delve in to use those in a little while. Let's have a look at some chain. We have got scrunching noises as we get out the beautiful chain reaction in a dusky amethyst colour glass faceted rondelle and a beautiful slightly darker metallic silver. I'm good, says Janet. That's good to hear, my darling. Good morning to you, Amy. And Chris says, I finally made a live show. Welcome, darlings. It's good to have your company. So we've got 2 gauges of wire. And not only have we got this beautiful chain reaction, let's pop that up to the top. We've also got this absolutely fabulous, I think it's ion plated, but don't quote me on that. I'm not clever on the techie stuff. Check out this absolutely beautiful rainbow coloured clasp. It's a sizable parrot or lobster clasp. Love that very, very much. And you get acres and acres of chain. Yes, I realise technically we don't measure chain in acres. I don't care. I'm going to call it acres of chain because you do get quite a long length there. Esmeralda is in. Good morning to you. Celia is in from a very cold Lancashire. It's dead on freezing here, Celia. I hope that you're surviving the weather okay. Let's put that beautiful bundle of chain just up at the top there. You've got some findings. I've got 2 different types of earring findings. I've got in that lovely gunmetal colour a traditional ear hook, but I've also got these little captive ones which have got this snap back to them. I think of them as safety ear wires, and I have one client in particular who doesn't want any other fitting, so those are really handy. You've got a couple of ear wires there. Good morning, says Janet. Another Janet watching live and excited. I'm excited to have you both here. Thank you very, very much. Deborah is in from Seneca in Pennsylvania on a rainy day. Bring on your sunshine. Absolutely. So you've got ear findings there. Gosh, I love you, says Chris. I love you back, sweet pea. I hope that your day is as beautiful as your demeanour. Deanna is in from Northern Carolina, and Stacey's in from Columbus in Ohio. Janet's coming in from, I want to say Boise, Idaho, but my pronunciation is not the greatest. We've got another clasp set here, so let's pop that one out. This is so cool. So what I have done with this particular piece, which is a magnetic clasp, if you have an in-body device that uses a battery, such as a pacemaker, please take your physician's advice before using magnetic clasps. Hello all. Hello Miss Jemmy, says Melanie. Snowing in Boise, and if I've pronounced that poorly, forgive me. Sophia or Sophia is in from Southern California. The sun finally came out, but it's been cold and rainy. Hello from sunny Florida. Deanna, I love your accent. Where are you from? I was born in Shakespeare's Stratford-upon-Avon, and that's where my accent is from. 40 degrees in Southern California. Brr. Well, we are dead on 32 in the Fahrenheit language today. Dead on 32 right now. It's about to get a lot colder. Hello everyone, ready for a space wire wrapping adventure? I love that, Danielle, thank you so much. What I have done with my clasp, which is a magnetic clasp, Susan's in from Southern California. Tucson is represented by Kathy. I have dismantled it and I have used the beautiful star and moon in a pair of earrings, which I'm going to show you at the end of today's live. Angel says good afternoon. Deanna's been to Scotland, very far from Scotland, in terms of English miles at least. Kathy is in, oh my gosh, the comments are coming thick and fast, I can't keep up with you. Levita's in from Jersey City, raining. Sorry to hear that, darling. Tamara's in from Massachusetts. So I've got a beautiful crescent moon and a gorgeous diminutive star. I took this apart and made it into earrings, although I have used the magnetic clasp in my main feature. So we'll pop that up to the top for a little bit later. Now, if you know me, you know I love using wire in my jewellery, but you'll also know I love gemstones. Shakisha's in from Kansas. Hello, darling, how are you? Let's have a gandaroo. We've got some chevron amethyst. Actually, you see this colouring just here, this slightly tan colouring? That's very common in a type of amethyst called Saginetic. I don't think that that's what this is, but it's really cool to see it. So you've got a couple of gorgeous amethysts. You've got some, I love this so much. It's a druzy. Now, it could be an agate, but it's been coated like a titanium coating. So you get the glitter, which is natural to the formation of crystals, and then you coat it with a very fine particulate of metal, and you get this fantastic finish. So we've got some of those. We've also got coated glass. Now, I don't know if that's a barrel, but it's got a beautiful facet and a beautiful coating. Hello from Canada, says Lena. I was putting the word Canada and Lena together. It's a faux druzy, super lightweight and sparkly. It's gorgeous is what it is, my darling. It's absolutely fabulous. I'm saving that till last. So we have got spacer beads with rhinestones. We've got glass. We've got metallics, which are always welcome. Another one of those glass babies. Check out this beautiful gemstone. It's like a puffy tire bead. Not quite a rondelle, it's beautiful is what it is. These are fabulous, and we're going to be using a couple of these in the main feature of our design today. Super faceting on these, and you've got that two-tone colourway. So it's almost black on one side, and then you've got rainbow iridescence on the other side. I'm going to keep a couple of those to hand, I think. We've got the gorgeous druzys, the beautiful natural stones. We've got goldstone. This is a navy blue goldstone. Now, goldstone was originally invented in Italy when an apprentice glassmaker accidentally bodged some copper filings into a vat of glass, and they absolutely adored the result. So they named it Aventura, which means by chance. And it's where we actually get the name for aventurine, which is a sparkly natural gemstone. We don't have aventurine today, but we do have this puffy pad of glorious goldstone, and I love telling that story. Something that happened by chance created this very, very beautiful piece. How about this? Fantastic. Now this looks to me like an agate that has been super triangle faceted to create this absolutely outstanding bead. They are so beautiful. Always backed up. Now this is the Faux Druzy in that little crescent moon shape. These are drilled through at the tip, so these are going to make perfect little beads or earrings, whatever you fancy making with them. But you've got lots to play with in there, and as ever, you've got, oops-a-daisy, I've unleashed the beads too soon. Oh my goodness. Garen is in from Loveland in Ohio. Welcome to you. We've got lots to play with, and as always, you've got choices about how you can make this project to your own desires. So let's pop some of these beads up and out of the way for now. I might leave those two just there. Pop those back in the pot, and let's have a look at this last piece. Now this is a tektite. A tektite. Paula is in from Willow. That's, I want to say Alaska. Tell me if I'm wrong, please. How cold is it for you today, my darling? We're dead on freezing here. So a tektite is formed when an otherworldly material collides with planet Earth. And because it's gone through our atmosphere, it's super, super hot. And where it touches down, the heat and impact, the force of the impact and the very, very high temperature caused by the journey through the layers of the atmosphere causes almost like a splash off. And that splash off basically melts local rock or sand or materials such as that. and it takes this form, which is a tektite. So it is not necessarily made from space, but it is caused by space materials. And I love telling that story as well. Stacey's in from Cincinnati in Ohio. I can say words. Not all of them are sensible though. So that is a fabulous piece. And I'll show you at the end of today's live what you can do with one of those if you want to. Let's pop that up and out of the way. So I have made a dingly dangly necklace using a couple of different wire wrapping techniques. So I've made some back-to-back crescent moons and a lovely twinkly star out of wire. And then I've added these onto, I like to think of it as a full moon form, but you can imagine that exactly however you want to. And then I have added a few extra beads up the neckline of that dingly dangly out of this world necklace. Oh, it's so much fun. So much fun. I can't wait to share this with you. And you can face those crescent moons in the opposite directions if you want to. You can absolutely play around with the design to your heart's content. As I say, I've added some beads and metallics up on the neckline of the design. And then I've teamed that with that beautiful, I want to say ion plated chain, but I could be wrong. Look at that colour shift. Isn't that absolutely magnificent? So I've got pinks, purples, blues, greens, golds, and almost a teal tone as well. If I just move that around a bit, you can see why I love this chain so much. And then up at the top, I've chosen to wear it with that beautiful magnetic clasp. So why don't we shuffle this up? Dark and pouring rain in Maryland. Glad it's not snow. Yeah, I bet. We were expecting a bit of snow here in the middle of England in northern Oxfordshire, but it hasn't really done overly much. There was a bit of a sprinkle. It's just staying incredibly cold. So let's grab some wire out of the way. And let's have a look at making these charms. Now I want to show you these separately to the main piece, simply because you can do so much with them. Once you've got that design down, you can make little charms or earrings. You remember we've got 2 sets of earring findings in today's kit, which is fantastic value, along with those 2 sets of chains, 2 types of clasp, and a plethora of beads, both glass, metallic, and those natural gemstones. Oh, they're beautiful. They really, really are. I'm just going to show you as well a quick project that I made on the sly. Hi from rainy Fredericksburg in Virginia. Welcome to you, my darling. So I had a couple of little bits of chain left over, and of course I had that other oversized clasp, and I wanted to use those fabby druzy beads. They're fantastic. So I just made a little bar down at the bottom, and then sized down that crescent moon and made a little digi star as well, just to make a bracelet to match the suite. So I'm going to show you the key techniques for those designs, and if you've got gemstones left over or beads left over, as I have, this is all left over from my Out of This World kit, then you can make a little bit more accessory with your jewellery kit today. So why don't we get started on making our first piece, which is a crescent moon. So let me just measure this section of wire I've cut. It's around about 9 inches in length. If you have never worked with wire before, making it warm using your hands is key. -2 Fahrenheit in Willow, apparently, which sounds really cold. I don't know what that is in centigrade, but I imagine it's pretty chilly. Pretty dang chilly. Kathy's in from Waynesborough. Welcome to you, sweet pea. So I've got my 9-inch section of that heavier gauge. It's 18 gauge round silver colour medium temper wire. There's 9 inches here, and I'm just going to warm that through a couple of times. Now I find it easier. I have arthritis in a couple of my fingers and my wrist on one side, so I like to make my life easier. So I'm going to use the grip strength of my pliers to help me get a really good firm hold on one end of that wire, and I'm going to run that between thumb and forefinger a good 5 or 6 times, and what you'll notice is that wire has become a little bit firmer to the touch. It's less floopy. I'll just show you a piece that hasn't been touched. That's just kind of very easy to put into position, and it doesn't like it overly much, but if you warm that up first, you'll get a much nicer feel to it. So what we're going to do is come around about 1.5 to 2 inches from one end, and put a little bit of a bend up on that wire. I'm going to make it a right angle bend just so that I've got a bit of a place marker to work towards. Now I'm making today's charms, these sections, the crescent moons and the stars, and you could do that in whatever order you wanted to. I'm making them with easy, openable and closable loops. In a design like this, there's not a huge amount of weight coming down, and it's actually reasonably successful just to use an open and closable loop. This design is made so if you wanted to do a wrapped loop, you absolutely can. What I might do is show you that on one of the other designs later, just in case you wanted to. But honestly, for me, that's going to be perfectly adequate. I'm just going to give that a tiny squish between the flat faces of my pliers to make that nice and strong. And we'll work with that piece a little bit later. So let's pop that one up to the top now. Hello from Robin in Louisville, Kentucky, I want to say. I'm not the greatest with place names, I'm afraid. But I hope that that is correct. And hello to you, my darling. So we've got that about 1.5 to 2 inch on one side. And what we're going to do is start with a round form to make the outside of our first crescent moon. So I'm going to put a lovely little bit of warmth into that wire, just pulling away on the long side of that wire. Now I'm going to use a ring mandrel, but you could use a torch or the top of a lotion bottle or a nail varnish or whatever it is that you have to hand that's a reasonable size for the outside section of your crescent moon. So I'm going to go quite a long way up my very dog-eared old ring mandrel and just push the wire around it until I get a good shape and size. What I'm looking for is a nice smooth, and it's more than half a circle, it's more than a semicircle. I'm just going to adjust the angle up at the top there for a second. So if we imagined that the semicircle came down like so, we've gone another section around just to make sure that we've got a really lovely crescent moon, because I always think if you've got just a half moon it doesn't look quite right, so we've gone further than halfway round. Good afternoon from North Carolina and from Boynton Beach. I can't catch up with all of the comments, so I'm just going to say hello and love to you all. So we're going to look at the point that is beyond that halfway. So if we say that this is 12 o'clock, directly opposite it must be 6 o'clock. So I'm going to come around not quite to 3 o'clock, maybe it's just a little bit beyond, that's closer to 4 o'clock there. I'm going to grip that wire from underneath so it's easier for you to see the angle I'm going to turn back. So like I said, we've gone past that halfway point, and I'm going to draw the wire sharply back, and I've just allowed that to sit underneath my design. I'm not doing anything terribly 3D, they're quite close together, but I do want that to come back as far as it can. Now that's not a very sharp point just yet, and we want it to have a nice sharp point. So what I will do is very, very carefully and firmly hold that first part of the crescent moon we've made, and I'm just going to gently, very, very softly just close the pliers up like this to put a slightly finer point on the end of my crescent moon. Now you could use a further down, smaller point on your ring mandrel if you have one, or you could of course use a trusty marker pen. I've had this one for donkey's years, believe it or not, it still writes. So what I'm going to do is put some warmth into the tail of wire that's coming away without disturbing too much the outside of the crescent moon. So if I just put a little bit of heat and warmth into that, it will want to start curving round anyway, but what I'm going to do is just draw that back a little bit, giving it a gentle wiggle, and the whole camera wiggles and everybody wiggle. So what I want to do is use that smaller form to make the inside of my crescent moon. So I'm just going to pull that around to begin with and see what it looks like. So you will need to just adjust that gently from side to side, not being too brutal, and just make it look how you want your crescent moon to look. You may have a very specific aesthetic ideal in mind. So what I'm going to do now is try and reflect the point down at the bottom. If we imagine we've got that 12 o'clock point and that 6 o'clock point, and then we've got around about 4 o'clock here, I want to come across on the top of that inner crescent, just adjusting that manually to make it sit how I want. And I'm going to do a very similar thing as we did a moment ago. So I'm going to hold that wire very, very firmly with the tip of my pliers. If I just tilt that, you'll see about where that is. And I'm going to push the wire back across And I want those 2 points to be stacked, one on top of the other. So if you think that that's a little bit too far over to the right, you can just move that around slightly with those pliers. And I'm going to allow the tail of wire to come over the top. It's gone underneath, so let's just switch that over the top until it transects that first angle that we made. So if I pop that down on the board for a second, you can see we've come down about 1.5 inches to 2 inches. We've gone around a larger circular form, made a slightly finer point on the bottom of that crescent moon, and then used a smaller round form to create the inside of that crescent moon. What I'm going to do again is pinch a hold of those 2 wires and just very gently tighten up the tip of that crescent, like so. I pop that down for a second. You can hopefully see quite neatly on this back cloth what we're up to. Good afternoon, Ileana, or Elena. Apologies if I have mispronounced your name. So what we have now is the long tail of wire going off to the side. That's over the top of the central core wire. And what I'd like to do is just grip the wire, the long tail of wire, just before it hits that point. And I'm going to push just a tiny, tiny bit up. And this is because I want an angle change to occur. So the wire's coming back on the moon, on the shape of the moon, and then it's just going to go up at about 45 degrees. The reason I do that is to make a slightly nicer transition to create that moon shape, that crescent moon shape. Where did I get my wood, Mandrel, says Anne? I've no idea. I've had it for 12 years. It's absolutely battered. It was probably from a tool sale, if I'm honest. I've had it since the dawn of time. What you can do, let me just grab... I have this absolutely gorgeous because it's purple and you've got all your US ring sizes on it. This is a Beadalon ring mandrel. It's metal. You can hammer onto it if you want to. It's a thing of great beauty. I don't use it on screen because it clonks around. It's noisy. As you can probably hear, when I pick it up and put it down, it makes a dreadful din on the microphone. So I use my little light wooden mandrel that I've had, as I say, since the dawn of time. Welcome, Jessica. Hello. If I'm not seeing your comment and commenting on it myself, I do apologise. I can't see everyone. I'll go through the comments after the live and pick up on any questions if I can. Or perhaps Danielle can shout at me if there's anything that's very pertinent. Hazel says, finally got here. Hello, Jem. Hello, Hazel. How are you, sweet pea? So where we've taken that angle change is at the point where the first angle change occurred. And I'm going to grip the angle change itself. So if I just lift that slightly, you can see where I'm holding that wire. And what I want to do now is push that long tail so that it goes over the back of the design. It's coming away at 90 degrees on the back. If I show you that from the top, you can see. If I bring that up slightly, it'll go ever so slightly blurry, but it should show you what I'm talking about with that very tiny, minute angle change. So we've come on from the top of the horn here, up to the first angle change, and we've got this tiny amount of wire just going up at 45 degrees before we push the wire over the back. And what I'm going to do is hold on to that little angle change with my pliers whilst I now push the wire all the way over to the right hand side behind our core wire. This is the core because we're going to be adding a bead onto it in a couple of minutes, and then we're also going to wrap this tail of wire around the core. So this is our wrapping wire and this is our core wire. It's all one piece and it can get confusing if I don't specify, so I'd rather over specify and you all know exactly what is occurring. So what we need to do now is to wrap a couple of times around the core with this long tail. Now because we've done some angle changes and we've pulled that wire around, this is already starting to harden. So I'm going to give that a little bit of heat and warmth, like so. And then I think what I might do, just to make it easier visually, is trim away those last couple of inches. Well, it's barely that actually, 1 3/4 maybe. I always like to start with more wire than we need, and then we've got scraps for later. So what I want to do now is to support the upper horn of that crescent moon with my pliers, whilst I bring the tail of wire around. I'm doing that in very tiny, small movements. And the reason I'm supporting just here is because if you don't support that wire, what can happen is as you're pulling the tail wire around the core wire, this will shrink and it will change the shape of your crescent moon. So if you want to, you can just tighten that up slightly now you've started wrapping. I'm going to give that a teeny tiny squeeze in this direction as well. And then I'm just going to support it whilst I bring that tail around. Now that wire has got very, very firm, so you may need just a little bit more coercion. And if it does get a little bit gappy, you can give that a gentle squish. Charlene says excellent directions. That's so good to know. Thank you very much. So I'm going to make this a moon that faces that way. And what I would like to do then is have a front side and a rear side. So if I grab my flush or my semi-flush cutters, I'm going to trim this tail of wire down a little bit further. So it's just a teeny tiny bit left. And I'm going to push that so that that cut end sits on the rear of the design. So I'm just going to pull that down into position and give the whole thing a very delicate touch with a squish of my pliers. Now generally speaking, I don't squish any wire design where wires cross over, but for this what I want to do is to make sure that that rear side is neat and tidy and there's no jagged edges. So that's the basis of your crescent moon. What we're going to do now is add our choice of bead, and I think I want to make this design with this fabulous druze. So let's pop one of those on. You can choose whichever of these fantastic bead selections you wish. Laura Ann says, I do not have the earrings. Is it possible that they were only sent to me in a pre-production kit? Could I ask you kindly, Danielle, to check? So you've got all of those different fabulous beads to choose from, whichever ones you fancy. Now I'm going to show you on this design how to make an open and closable loop, because it makes it so suitable for beginners to wire work. If you want to create this as a closed loop, a wrapped loop, then I'll show you how to do a wrapped loop later on. If you're going to go for the simpler and perfectly adequate option, let me turn the moon so it faces down. This is the front of my design, so I'm going to bring that wire forwards, always being mindful of my beads. So I've got a forwards bend, it's just coming away from the mat towards me. And I need to grab my round nose pliers, which I abandoned somewhere over here earlier. And I'm going to rotate the wire around to create a round form. So there's the first half, the bead will move up and down because it's a nice large drill hole. And I'll take that tail of wire over and underneath. So I've got a round form. If I wanted to make a wrapped loop, I would make a little bit more space between the angle and the round form, and then I could take that tail around. But because I'm making an open and closable simple loop, let's flip this over so that the tail of wire is on top. What I want to do is look very carefully, make sure that that wire is going to be cut at the point where it comes out of the bead. So I'm going to get that little tail of wire cut away. And you can see that that's slightly open, which is fine. That's how we make it. So I'm going to close that down and make sure I'm happy with the shape. Sometimes you just need to centralise that. Make sure that that loop goes all the way around and then open and close. Is it possible that I was sent the earrings separately then? Okay, well, I'm sure that you have got some earring findings in your collection. You've got plenty and plenty of beads to make some fabulous additional pieces. If it's not in the description, then that was probably just a pre-production kit that was sent out to me, and I will just take them off your screen so you don't even think about them anymore. That's just what I had, my darlings. So there we have a nice strengthened open and closable loop. Chris says, will this be available to watch later too? I'm ill and just can't stay the whole show. Of course it will be, my lovely. You just hop back on whenever you fancy. It'll stay on Facey for a long old time. So you can see we've got a beautiful spinny bead and we've got a couple of crescent moons to add into our design later. Now the star, stay with me on this because it seems complicated, but it isn't. It's practice. Come back when you feel up to it, Chris. You take care and feel better soon. So I've got about 10 inches this time of that medium temper silver colour round copper wire in an 18 gauge. And what we're going to do is, as ever, start off by giving that a bit of a warm through. I cannot stress how important this is to people who aren't new to wire work. Genuinely, get a feel for your wire. Pick up a piece that's just been cut off the reel, test it, bend it, try and get it round a ring mandrel, do things with it, and then cut yourself another piece, warm it through 4 or 5, 6 times maybe, and feel the difference. It's so worth it. It takes on a whole new life. Got to love working with wire. So to create our star shape, we're going to start again the same kind of distance from the top, about 1.5 inches or so, and we're going to put a much stronger than a right angle to begin with, and then we're going to bring that back down so it comes away at about, I can't do maths, 135 degrees. Instead of going to a right angle, it's like halfway between the next one. Is that 135 degrees? Trigonometry or whatever this level of maths is, it's not my sphere of expertise. So the next thing that we need to decide is how big we want our star to be. Because I'm working with a 10-inch piece of wire, I'm going to make this next distance about 1/2 inch. About 1/2 inch is what we're going to work with. Now what I need to do is bring the wire up towards me at this next angle change. So if I draw the wire up, like so to begin with, you can see we've got a bit of a funny thing going on. We've got a straight line, and then we've got an angle down, and then the wire comes up towards you, directly at you. And what we're going to do now is fold that all the way over. So if I just tilt the wire around, ignore this bit for a second. We're just going to be working with these little short 1/2 inch or so lengths. And if I hold that underneath, what we're going to do is draw that wire all the way back, like so. So we've got a 1/2 inch length going one way, and then it hairpin racetracks all the way back on itself. And what we want to do is repeat that, so we've got another one, but we're going to build it up on top. So if I grip hold of that wire like so, and I push that all the way around, it's building up like a paperclip on top of the other one. Think of it like a paperclip. So in order for me to show you this, I'm going to be swapping angles around, and I'm using the first bend to make my measurement. So if I push that all the way over, you can see it's a bit like a paperclip at the moment. We're doing circuits, so we've gone 1, back on itself 2, back on itself 3. So we need to do that again. So I'm going to hold onto that section of wire, push that all the way along, and I'm sitting them on top of themselves because that's how I measure them. That's how I make sure. You could do the angle changes with a ruler if you wanted to, but I am just going to get them to sit on top of each other. So for the, I think the last time, we're going to push that all the way up and over. What I might do is just put a little angle on the end there. I think it goes in the opposite direction in a minute, but we won't worry about it. So I don't want to pull that open too much, but we've got this almost spring-like bendy wire. So if I just hold this in the orientation it will be eventually, the wire comes down, it goes out to the side, it turns back and comes straight on top of itself, turns back again, straight on top of itself, and then all the way off. So you've got 5 little 1/2 inch lengths. So what we're going to do next is just start opening the wire out. So I prefer to do this by hand because it means that you don't get too many tool marks on your wire. So what I'm going to do is just very, very gently start opening up the top section. So I'm just making a bit of a V shape where it was a racetrack hairpin. So you've got that little V shape going, and then what we're going to do now is, can you see the next layer of wire? If I turn it over into this orientation, we want to open that out again, like so. We've got the next bit of wire has been opened out. If you find that there are little deviations in that straight line, that 1/2 inch length straight line, don't even worry about it because we can refine that later. Now, if this is getting tricky to see, I can only apologise, but it's a process that pays to practice. Let me turn this over to the opposite direction. I think that might be the answer. So we've got a little racetrack hairpin, and we're just going to open each of those out from being almost like an ND 500 straight around the track, and we're just going to open it up to a series of V shapes. So we've only got one more where it's of that hairpin shape. What we're going to do is open another one of those out very, very carefully. I'm using my nails. You could use pliers if you prefer, but can you see how we're making that star shape? And already you've got a star shape just by having those race tracks stacked on top of one another. You've got 5 little angles, like so. And what we will do in a moment is just refine some of those angles. What I want to do is tie this all together up at the top. So you've got a couple of different jaunty angles, which you don't need to worry about whether they're going in the right direction or not. If they're not, what you can do is just pull that nice and straight up at the top, like so. And what we're going to do now is wrap one of the tails around the other tail. So you could take a moment just to get those angles a little bit better if you want to. If you want to refine the ends of your stars, what you can do is pinch very firmly with your non-dominant hand and give that a very delicate touch, like so. And just get those a little bit firmer. And then you can open up the angles as you prefer. So let's give that a little bit of a pinch. And then this top one, I've slightly marked the wire where I was a little bit brutal with it, so apologies for that. Practice is what makes these beautiful, and also what makes them slightly more even. Taking your time as well to get that nice and straight. So I think that this one is going to be my core wire. That's where I'm going to attach the bead in just a moment. So if I grip the top of the other wire, that's my wrapping wire, I want that to come over at a nice sideways angle. So let me just put that angle in first. Pop it down on the board. So you can see it's slightly flappy on this side, for want of a better word. So I'm just going to close that up a bit before we go any further. Again, a very gentle touch just to refine those end points of the star, like so. And if you overdo it, you can just open that out again with the straight sides, the flat sides of your pliers. Overall, I'm reasonably happy with that for this being alive. With the little star shape, it's all about practice. You've basically got 5 lengths of wire that are the same, and you create them into a stack, like a multi-storey car park, or a too many turns on a paper clip, something like that. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this tail and wrap it around the core upright. Now, this does look complicated, but it isn't. It's not complicated at all. It's only taking so long because I'm talking about it so very much. So I'm going to take this last angle just here and firmly support it whilst I bring that wrapping wire up. Make sure that I'm happy with how that's sitting, supporting that angle again and pushing the wire over the top. And this goes back to, if you don't support that angle, what can happen is the wire gets pulled up and used in the wrapping section. So let me grip a hold of both of those wires and push the tail over. And then I'm going to slot my pliers in like this, and this will stop this section of wire being pulled around into the wrap, because we don't want to lose any of that shape and form. Let me just grab a slightly better pair of pliers for this job. No, those are too big. Let's get this one. So if you support that wire firmly, what you can do is take the wrapping wire around the core without that section at the back here, the one I'm supporting, being pulled up and shortening the side of your star. You may need to just tighten this up as you go, and then you should be able to take that tail around. So overall, as I said, because this is alive, this design takes a little bit of practice to get right. I'm just going to support that and take the tail around one more time, like so, before trimming a little way from the end. You can see that I've left myself a little bit of a tail there. Pop that in the scrap pot for later. And then I'm pinching very firmly whilst I take that last little bit of wire and carefully squish it down flat on the back. What you will want to do then is just address the angle of your core wire. If it's coming off at a slightly weird angle, you can give it a second and get that slightly straighter. Overall, I'm reasonably happy with my little star. You take your time and you have fun and lots of practice doing it. So let's match up with one of the moons that I did earlier and pop one of these Druzys on. Love the colour on these, they are fabulous. Look at that swirl. So I'm going to do another simple loop just here so that all of my pieces match one another. So I'm bringing that wire forwards and away from the bead. If I put it down on the board, you'll see how that sits. The wire's coming up towards you. And we're going to use the base of those round nose pliers again to create the first half of that circular form. When you're pinching really close to the base of your round nose pliers, please be careful that you don't catch in the box joint because it can ruin your piece that you're working on. So just always kind of look twice before you do the thing. And again, we've got that circular form to go for. We're looking at the side with the tail wire coming over the top. And again, I can just say how heartbroken I've been many, many times cutting the wrong wire. So look twice and cut once. My nanny used to make clothes, not like a nanny that looks after you, my grandmother. And she used to say, you measure twice and cut once. And in that way, you don't waste quite so much. So we're going to set that circular form correctly and ensure that it sits centrally over the top of that core wire, and then I'm going to open and close my pliers on that circular form when I'm happy with it, both in terms of shape, size and positioning. Now the reason that I give this wire such a good firm squishing is because I will want to open that loop and close it later on. And if you don't get that firmly squished when it's at its best shape and form, it can become out of shape when you start to open and close that loop. So I did make a little moon earlier so that we can add a couple onto my design. So in the demonstration piece, I've got a couple of crescent moons facing inwards, side by side with that lovely star. In the piece we're going to make together now, I've got a couple of moons and a star, so you could play around with that however you fancy. I haven't decided what I want to do yet. Looks like they're growing. If you're making two moons, it does pay to make them at the same time so that they're the same size. I hope that that all makes sense so far. Let's pop these up to the top for now and work on the next part of the design, which is so much fun. So I've got around about 18 inches of that heavier gauge wire. This is the 18 gauge silver coloured round wire. It's a medium temper, and that's 18 inches that I've cut. So I'm going to grip a hold of one end and get that really lovely and soft down in the centre of the wire. I wouldn't worry too much about the ends for the time being. We'll sort those out in a little while, but that central section is what I'm looking to work out right now. So starting in the centre of this wire is where we're going to be using our basic round nose pliers. Basic round nose pliers are next on the agenda. So I'm going to start just slightly over to one side of that centre, and I'm going to make a loop. And what I want to happen is for the wire to come around, do a loop-de-loop, and then continue along the same line. It's not a difficult thing to do. It's a tricky thing to explain sometimes. So I'm going to make a reasonably sized loop, probably about halfway down my pliers. If I push the wire all the way around, what I tend to do is make the first half of that manoeuvre, and you can see I withdrew my pliers and then I put the other prong of my pliers in to draw that round in the second half of the manoeuvre. So you can see I've got the wire skirting along. It does a loop-de-loop and then it continues, and what we're looking for is for that line to be flat and imperceptible. If it's slightly open or squishy, you can tighten that up very, very gently with a pair of pliers. The next thing we're going to do is to make a little bit of a circular form. Now you could use a larger ring mandrel, or if you're lucky enough to have a round wooden bangle block, you can start making that form. This isn't going to be the final size of the design, but it does give you an idea of the roundness of wire. So I'm going to be using these two beads next because they've got a really good central drill aperture. Again, I do love these because they're dark on one side and then you've got that mystic coating on the other. And what I would like to do now is to take the longer piece of wire of the two, because we started just to one side of the middle, and I'm going to slide that bead down next to the loop. And what I want to do now is to create another loop in exactly the same way. So if I just bring that wire back out again, I have removed some of that roundness that we created, but it's all for a good reason. It's all for a good reason. So let's draw that wire around, and you can see I'm taking very, very small movements with those round nose pliers just to get the beginning of that loop into position. What I don't want to do is put any stress on my gorgeous bead. So if I pop those pliers back in and then draw that wire all the way around, and I'm going to rotate the design in my hands. This protects the beads and my wrists, and hopefully will keep the integrity of the shape of that wire. So if I rotate it back around, you can see that I have failed. This is something that happens quite a lot. What we're going to do is fix that. So I'm going to pinch to make the wire sit as flat as possible, and then I'm going to support that wire whilst I just draw the tail very, very gently up, and we're back to straight line through the bead, and then we've got a loop-de-loop off the bottom of that wire. Now I'm not pinching very, very hard here, I'm just very, very gently adjusting the wire so that we get that nice flat baseline that sits all the way through. So whichever side is longer, and it's still this side, I'm going to add another bead in and allow that to sit all the way down to the base. When you are putting beads that are made of glass or gemstone, really anything that isn't a resin or a metal, you will always need to be respectful of those beads when you're starting to bend wire inside the beads. Now these have got a really good cracking drill hole, and you can see there's loads of space outside that wire, which is why I've chosen them for this segment of the design. So I want to have another loop-de-loop now. So where have those round nose pliers gone? Here they are. So I'm going to start by rotating the wire, and you can see that I start a little bit away from the bead, and then I'm going to draw the tail all the way around. And again, I will switch those pliers if I need to. Don't be afraid to do that. And if that's a little bit, I'll actually make it too far away, and then we'll move it along so that you can see what to do if this happens to you. So if I've made my loop, and you can see there's far too much of a gap to the side of that bead, you need to move your loop along. Now this is possible. So what we're going to do is to put the pliers inside that loop and rotate it around until it sits where you want it to. But what happens then is you don't have that flat baseline. So we put the pliers back in, and we're going to very, very gently just elevate that side of the wire that's dropped until we get that loop to sit how we want. So what I need to do is put some more heat and warmth back into this design really quickly, so that it doesn't get too upset and it doesn't set in the wrong place. Now this is the point at which you will want a round form that is just a little bit smaller probably than you want your circular form to be on your necklace. So let's just lift those out of the way for a second. So if I'm making a piece that is, let's say it's 1 inch across, I will want a form that's 3/4 of an inch because wire is springy. So I don't think I've got anything particularly to hand that's going to help me. Let me grab a beautiful Jessie James pot. I use these for all sorts in my house. Hi Jessica, how are you? Now, as I mentioned earlier, when we're bending wire inside glass or gemstone beads, we really do need to be respectful of those beads. Also, if you're using a form to help you, you again need to be extra respectful, because the last thing we want to do is to crack a bead. So I'm putting extra heat and warmth into the wire this side, extra heat and warmth into the wire on this side, and then I'm going to start getting it to form around whatever round shape you have. Now this is going to be much too large, so I'm going to get it around this form anyway. Whether it's too large or not, it gives me a great starting place. What I wanted to do was to demonstrate how wire springs. So you can see how much larger than the round form I've used the resultant shape is. So what I'm going to do is grab my ring mandrel and very, very gently and delicately just start rotating the edges around the fattest part of my ring mandrel, just to get those sides looking good. If you can find a round form that works for you, all the better. So that's springing out much larger than the end of my ring mandrel, and I'm just going to give that a little bit of help by manual formation. So you can just set your pliers to hold on to that loop on either side and just get that to sit exactly how you want it to. Now, in all honesty, you probably do still have one side of wire which is longer than the other. If I just hold that all the way up, you can see it's this one for me. This one is longer. So that's the one I'm going to designate the wire that goes up in through the bead. So that will be my core wire. Now, if I imagine that the central loop down at the bottom is my 6 o'clock, I want to take the longer of my two wires up at a right angle at the 12 o'clock position. So it's dead opposite. So let's just draw that wire all the way up to the top. As ever, I've got far more wire than I need, but I'd rather that than too little. So if I pop that down on the board for a second, you can see that we have got the basis of our out of this world design, and that's all ready to start this tail wire wrapping around the core wire. So again, if you're happy with the shape and size of the round form that you've created, you will want to grip a hold of the shorter tail of the wire so that it doesn't get eaten up and start wrapping around and change the dimensions. So we've got that first bend coming back around that core wire, and if you want to, you can pinch that up by hand just to get a nice tight finish, like so. And you can see that it's a bit like a racetrack is circling around that core wire. Now, as I said, I've got loads more wire than I actually need, but I'd always rather have too much than too little. So I'm going to, again, just rotate this slowly round to support that section of wire that goes up to the shoulder and starts wrapping around. What I don't want to do is for that to be used in the wrapping around the core wire. So I've got one full circuit so far, and I'm just going to very gently tighten that up slightly, just putting my pliers over. If I bring that up, you can see what I'm doing. I'm just giving that a bit of a squish, very, very gently, just to make sure that I'm happy with the shape and form of my design. So I will continue to wrap 2 or 3 times around the core wire. So again, you will want to support that wire from underneath, just to make sure that none of it gets eaten up, circling around that central core wire. I'll probably do it one day and I'll show you what happens if you don't support it, but I don't want to ruin this one. Basically, as you start pulling the tail of wire around the core, this gets pulled and starts to become the coil. And if you've worked hard to preserve a shape or present a particular aesthetic, you don't really want that to happen. So let me just hold that by hand and we'll get one more wrap around. It's much easier to hold it by hand and just allow a little bit to go through than hold it with pliers, because you won't be able to see what I'm doing. So if you wish to have a little coil like I did on my one, you can indeed do that. If you want it to be neat and simplistic like we did with these ones, where we took the wire to the rear side and trimmed it away, you can trim that away at the back, or you can draw that across the front. We're going to trim that to about 1 inch, just under 1 inch actually, and I'm going to pop a coil on there for you. So let's get that nice and toasty warm, because it's had some real work hardening going on. That's very kind of you, Jessica. I appreciate that. Thank you so very much. So let's grip hold of the very end of that cut section, and we're going to start rotating around really slowly until you get the beginning of that coil. We're going to switch to our flat facing pliers and small movements. People are always asking me how I get such neat coils. Part of it is practice and part of it is slowness. Don't rush it. you can always put it down and come back to it later. So I've just squished that coil flat down against the neck of the design, and that's the basis of our Out of This World project. You can take a little bit more time than I have to make sure that your angles are perfect, that you've got a perfect round if you wish to. Why don't we now build up a neck of this design, a drop neck? So we used in the design before Air some metallic spacers, bead caps, and those gorgeous duotone faceted. It's kind of an amethyst colour, but I'm not sure what they're made of. They feel like glass. So let's have a look at some of our beads. I tell you what, let's go for one of those, and we'll have a bead cap. And do you know what? I think that's enough. You can build as many or as few as you want. So let's start with a filigree cutout bead cap. Pop in one of those Druzys. Pop another bead cap on. And then that's going to be the neck of my design. It's much longer in the demonstration piece. Having tricky problems with the internet due to weather. Sorry to hear that, darling. You come back and check out when you want to. You can have another look. We'll be here forever. A recording forever and ever. Janet, you're very, very kind. Thank you, my darling. I appreciate that. So I'm going to call it a day with the beads on the neckline, but you can make it a really elaborate long drop. You've got loads of beads and spacers to work with. You do whatever you fancy. I'm going to show you now how to do a wrapped loop. Now, if you made your component parts as wrapped loops, you would need to add them in. Every time we created a loop, you'd need to slide that wrapped loop in, or you would need to create the wrapped loop into the loop on the design. So I might actually make another quick moon in a second and show you how to add it afterwards, because it's the slightly less stressful option. Let's go for a wrapped loop up at the top here first. When you're creating a wrapped loop on top of a stack of beads or whatever work you've got going on down here, you need to allow a gap. So you remember when we made the component, we put that forwards bend just a tiny distance above the bead. With this one, we need a gap. So let's push that wire forwards, and I'll show you what that gap looks like so. So you've got a gap between the top of your bead stack and where that forwards pushed angle comes. I've got beads everywhere! Beads everywhere! So because you've got a choice of two chains to use, you've got this gorgeous star in those beautiful colours, or you've got a large beaded chain reaction, you will want to make quite a large wrapped loop up at the top, as I have done here. If you make a large, this is basically a bail, it's a simple bail. When you make a large simple bail, it means you've got all options on what to hang it from. You can put it on ribbon, or you can use a larger chain. So I'm going to grab my 6-step bail makers and use number 6, which is the largest. You could, of course, if you wanted a really big one, use a marker pen. There's always that. So let's use number 6 to create that round form. First half of that circular form done, and then go for a second manoeuvre, drawing that tail of wire all the way around, and you get a really decent size and a good firm shape with those 6-step bail makers. They are delightful to work with. So make sure that you've got your beads all back down into order, and what we're going to do is we're going to grip across the circular part of that circular form. I'm not gripping where the wires cross over. What I might do is just trim a bit of that tail away, because there's a little bit too much going on and it's going to hit the camera. So as ever, I chose to use far too much wire, but there we go. So hold on to that round form using flat facing pliers and a gentle touch, gentle but firm, and you shouldn't mark that wire. So we're going to take that tail all the way around the neck of the design and keep going until you fill the gap like so. So if I bring that to the back of the design, we're just going to trim that away and have a nice, neat, clean line. Just to get that squished down. Can you see where it's sticking up? Let me just tilt the... See, there's a sticky up bit. You can see the shiny bit on the end. We definitely want that to sit down flat. So I'm just taking a moment to smooth that down nice and softly. And if you very, very softly rotate those pliers in the direction that the wire travels, you'll get a silky smooth end and you won't pinch yourself. There we go. So that's the basis of our design. I'm going to show you how to add in using a simple loop that we created at the top of the show. So I'm going to open this like a jump ring. So I'm taking half of the loop with the cut side and lifting it. So you get that open aperture like so. That's really sweet of you, Winnie, thank you. And I think I'm going to stick the star in the middle. So I'm just going to allow that to sit through the loop. And then we need to close that open and closable loop in exactly the same way. So you can see there's the gap. Grip the open side, push it back into position. We want to make sure that that cut end touches the angle that comes out the top of the bead. When that is set into position, I like to reset the wire. So I'm just squishing exactly the same way as I did earlier on that open and closable form when it's in its final position. You can see it's shiny because I've squished it so hard that I flattened it slightly. I don't want it to come undone. So there we go. That's one side. And then we're going to add another one of these little babies in. Let's get that out of the way. In fact, I know what I'm going to do. I know what I'm going to do. So I need to make another one of these little moons. Let me see if I've got enough wire. Oh, that's just not quite enough. Hang tight, hang tight. There's more wire coming. If I can find it. Here we go. Well, let me just grab another approximately 7 or so inch length of that wire. There we are. And again, this is the 18 gauge silver coloured, 18 gauge even, silver coloured round wire in a medium temper. Going to give that a really lovely, smooth, warm through. Now, instead of starting, do you remember we made our first angle about 1.5 inches from the end? I'm going to make it further down so I've got more wire to make a wrapped loop. So if I put that angle probably 2.5 inches from the end instead, we're going to grab hold of that ring mandrel, put some heat into the wire, and I'm just recapping how we made that moon as quickly as possible. So we used the largest section of the form. If you want to see this in detail, it's at the beginning of this live recording, so you can see it slowed down. I just want to do a very quick little moon, and it's going to be larger than the other one, but I'm not fussy. I'm going to tighten up that little horn of the moon, put some heat into the wire as it comes along, and then you can use the round form, which is slightly smaller if you want to create the inside. I will say again, I'm whizzing through this because I've already shown you how to do the moon. If you want to see it slower, it's at the beginning of the recording. So push that all the way back across. This is more like a recap. So if you watched along earlier and you fancied having a go, you can make with me. Make that little angle change. Draw the wire across the back, like so. I'm going to support that whilst I bring the wire all the way around, sit it inside, like so. We're just going to bring that coil all the way around, tighten up any bits that are slightly mangled, support, and we'll go for, I think, 3 wraps again. And then I will trim that away at the back. This is a super speedy, sped up version of the same technique we learnt today. But I will take a moment to squish that wire down because you never want any sticky outy stabby bits. Oh, that was my finger. Oh, careful, don't go too fast. You might pinch your finger. There's no blood, we're all fine. So let's add a bead in, shall we, my friends? What shall we go for? Where is it gone? I thought I picked a bead up. Has it gone AWOL? Oh, we're going to have to go for a random. It's going to be a random bead, I think, today. So we're going to add on our bead. Beautiful, beautiful banded agate, dyed purple, gorgeous gemstone. And you can take a lot more time, obviously, to make your crescent moon perfect. And to make a wrapped loop, again, we're going to create that angle forwards, but we need to leave a gap for the wire to sit in. Let's grab those round nose pliers. Quite a small loop is what we need. So there's the first half of that round form. Take the tail all the way around. But what I'm doing here is I'm spiralling that circular form. So can you see there's a big gap just here? And what we're going to do is add this after we've made the form. So let's slide that one on in. And you can see now, if we recreate the design and add our charms on afterwards, this is a way that you can add them. So let's close up that little loop. And one of the reasons I don't teach this technique is because there's so much going on. It's really tricky to see, but you can see I've added that loop in. I showed you how to make a wrapped loop. It's exactly the same technique, but there's lots going on screen. So I don't teach this as a technique because it's tricky for you to see everything that's happening on the screen right now. But it's exactly the same technique that I taught you. It's just that there's lots going on. So let's get that to sit the correct way round. That looks pretty good to me. So we're going to trim away that sticky outy bit on the back there. Snip. And then tighten up that tiny bit. So if I just lift this up, it goes blurry, but you can see that cut end is all shiny just above the pink dot underneath James of Jessie James Beads, which is where you are right now. Welcome and thanks for hanging out with Jessie James Beads today and myself, Jem Hawkes. So let's squish that tail end down. Squooch, 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 and that is now nicely set. So because I'm a bit of a stickler for symmetry, what I'll probably do after the show is make another moon facing in the opposite direction with one of those banded agates with the gorgeous facets, and I'll put that all together later because then I will be able to wear it. I would struggle to wear it if it was so asymmetrical, if I'm honest. I know that's pathetic, but there we go. So here's a couple of random moons. Let's pop this down out of the way and show you the finished piece. So for the piece I made for today's class, you've got a moon facing inwards on either side and a star in the centre. And then you've got a stack of beads. You could go with or without loops. You could put a coil, you could put a coil on the top if you wanted to. And I chose to use this gorgeous star chain with the magnetic clasp. Now I promised to show you the other projects that I have made with my kit. So obviously we've got this one made just now. I also made a bracelet. So this is very, very simple techniques. You remember how we learnt the wrapped loop? I don't know yet, Jessica. I will ask on your behalf, darling, or do feel free to PM one of the ladies on the Facebook, and I'm sure they'll let you know. It's beautiful, isn't it? So you've got a wrapped loop up at the top. I showed you how to do that. If you do a double wrapped loop, so you've got a wrapped loop on either end and a bead in the middle, it's called a rosary link. Thank you so much, Deborah. It's very kind of you for hanging out with us today. I appreciate your kind words. So I had some shorter lengths of chain left over from my project. I could have used them to make dingly dangly earrings, but I chose to make this gorgeous bracelet using that fantastic, beautiful coloured lobster clasp. And I used the exact same techniques to create these mini moon and stars. Another lobster clasp, another rosary link down at the bottom. Let me just see if I can take this pair of earrings out without doing myself any damage. Oh yes, there we go. And I also made these using those fabulous amethyst ovals and asymmetric lengths of the star chain, and from the magnetic clasp attachment I took off, let me get the other earring out so you can see both of them. Thank you, Debbie, for watching. I appreciate your kind comments. Oh, you nearly had a piece of my ear then. Nearly had a piece of my ear. For somebody that makes a lot of jewellery, I don't wear earrings very often. So a simple loop on either side of that amethyst, because there's not a lot of weight in these. Asymmetric lengths of star chain, and then a star on one side and a moon on the other. That's about as asymmetric as I go. But it all came out of this fabulous kit. Last but not least, I had a scrap of 20 gauge wire, which I used to make this little shooting star. Could be a pendant, could be a charm, could be an earring, but with the fantastic story behind tektites. And do feel free to do a little bit of your own research. I love tektites. I love space stuff. So this has been a real blessing for me to be able to work on this out of this world kit. Let's see if my mouse wants to work. Hello, I'm still here. It's definitely me. So the earrings that I made, They're quite long. I've got quite a short little neck, so it's quite something for me to wear a very long pair of earrings, but they're nice and light. They're beautiful to wear. Beautiful to wear. It's been an absolute pleasure hanging out with you. Thank you so much for being with me, myself, Jem Hawkes, and the gorgeous Jessie James Beads crew. I'll be back next Thursday with I don't know what. It will be a surprise. I have no clue what I'm making or what I'm working with, but I know I'm excited because it's Jessie James Beads. If there are any questions at all, pop them in the comments underneath the video here on Facebook. The video on Facebook, and I'll try and address them. Long, long, long live and prosper. Mwah! Big hugs, and I'll see you guys really, really soon. Bye for now.